The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to a special edition of Bronx Talk. On June 22nd, Democrats across the city will go into the voting booth to select their party's candidate in the primary for mayor. Tonight, in conjunction with the Bronx Democratic County Committee, we present the Bronx Mayoral Forum to give candidates a chance to talk about how they plan to improve things in our borough. We'll meet the candidates and get the guidelines for tonight's forum in a moment, but let's introduce at first the chair of the Bronx Democratic County Committee. It is State Senator Jamal Bailey. Nice to have you with us, Senator Bailey.
Gary, once again, thank you. I want to thank BronxNet for always stepping up and being at the forefront of what you do the best, which is bring the news to the people of the Boogie Down Bronx, as we say. I'm grateful to the candidates for coming on tonight as we approach the most important and impactful mayoral election in my lifetime. COVID-19 has laid bare so many faults in our society, and no more than in the Boogie Down Bronx. In the Bronx, we've seen the results of health disparities. We've seen the results of socioeconomic, dysfunction. We've seen so many different things that have taken place, and now an executive has the opportunity to lead. We're doing things in a different way, even like debates tonight. We usually be there in person, speaking to each other and seeing each other, but we can't do that. So what executive is going to be able to do that? She or he is going to have to be able to step up and bring things to the table. And I'm confident that this crop of candidates that we have is going to be able to do that. And I think it's imperative that they've come to you tonight, the voters of the Bronx, to let you know what their plans are, what they're looking to do, and how they're going to lead you. Because in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, it says we the people. And yes, you the people that will be responsible for choosing our next executive, the next CEO, the next commander-in-chief of our great city. It starts and ends with you. So I'm really excited about the opportunity that we have in front of us. We have great candidates who all have passion and energy for our city. And again, it's up to you, Bronx. It's up to you to make sure that we have the best to lead our city. And Gary, thank you again for always doing what you do. You've been doing it for 26 years. And for a few more minutes, I think you do a great job tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Bailey. And to the audience, because of schedule conflicts and timing considerations, tonight's forum will be split into two parts. Participating candidates were selected by the Bronx Democratic County organization, and that was based on those who expressed interest in support. One of the candidates we need to mention right up top, who was going to join us in this first segment, Andrew Yang, will not be able to be with us. It was widely reported that he has tested positive for the coronavirus, and I know all of the candidates and all the people of the Bronx wish him and, of course, everybody who's been taken ill a speedy recovery, and we hope he gets back on the campaign trail as soon as possible. But right now, let's meet the candidates who will be in our first segment. We'll start with a former commissioner of the city's housing department, HUD secretary and budget director for President Barack Obama, Sean Donovan. Mr. Donovan, thank you so much for joining us.
Gary, great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
And also the executive director of Phipps Neighborhoods in the Bronx and a founder of social services, not-for-profits throughout the city of New York. It is Diane Morales. Ms. Morales, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Gary, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Viewers, please note we will have 5 other candidates in our next segment. For the 2 candidates who are here, this program is intended as a forum on issues that are important to the people of the Bronx. You will have 1 minute each to answer a question that I ask, and we ask that you keep any necessary subsequent back and forth to a minimum. No statement should be longer than 30 seconds. Our timekeeper is Yesenia Ramos, and she will give you warnings at 30 seconds and 15 seconds. Also, it's important to note that tonight's questions have been provided and approved by the Bronx Democratic County Committee. By prior agreement, our first question will go to you, Mr. Donovan. Again, thank you for joining us. Let's start with economic development. The Bronx is home to Cooperative Home Care Associates, which is the largest worker cooperative in the country. Worker cooperatives and employee share-owned plan companies, those are ESOPs, allow workers to capture the profits of their collective labor. Is this a valuable tool to include as we continue to grow the economy after the pandemic? And of course, what other concepts do you think will work to help Bronx businesses rebound?
Gary, thanks so much. And I just want to say thank you to Senator Bailey for his inspirational words about our democracy right now when it's been so tested in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere. I am a huge believer in the power of building wealth. And the co-op you talked about is one example of that, but it's one of many that as mayor I would pursue. I learned this lesson early in my career when I started working in the Bronx at a nonprofit. I helped create wealth for the South Bronx, for Bronxites more broadly, for Black and brown communities through creating homeownership in the Nehemiah program. I also worked with Nos Quedamos and many other nonprofits and have seen that when housing, businesses are owned individually by local folks, as well as collectively in co-ops, that you can actually not just end poverty, but build intergenerational wealth in a way that's enormously powerful. So I'm a big believer in the co-op model, but think we need to take it even farther and build many forms of community wealth in the Bronx that will help not just rebuild, but to reimagine the borough so that it works for everyone.
Thank you very much. And so then to you, Ms. Morales.
Yes, thank you so much, Gary. I have called for the creation of a solidarity economy moving forward. A solidarity economy actually has a dual strategy of working to stimulate economic activities that meet our basic human needs, while also reinforcing the values that make our city stronger, including democracy, sustainability, and justice. I think it's fascinating that you pointed out the Cooperative Home Care Associates in the Bronx. I actually worked closely with that organization while I was working in the Bronx over the last 10 years when I created a program, a worker program, a workforce training program called Career Network Healthcare, which actually trained young people and prepared them to enter the field of healthcare in partnership with Montefiore Medical Center and Hostos Community College. I believe that actually investing in worker-owned cooperatives is a critical step in creating a local economy that focuses and centers building and maintaining wealth in our communities, rather than focusing on extractive organizations that come and use our labor and extract our wealth. I really believe that that is the way to go. It ensures that traditionally low-wage workers have more autonomy in meeting the basic needs, their basic needs, and really increasing the opportunity for employer ownership. A solidarity economy would empower communities by providing equitable finance for small and minority-owned businesses, and that's what I think the Bronx needs moving forward.
Thank you very much to both of you. So then the next question will be directed to you, Ms. Morales. We have the two candidates. Just a reminder, later in the program, we'll have 5 more mayoral candidates. Let's talk about food justice. It was suggested in the last question as well. The Hunts Point Food Cooperative was in the news lately because of a labor strike that is now settled. But the whole episode underscores that the Hunts Point food market is one of the most important and largest food distribution centers in the country. In fact, many of those food service workers throughout the city are Bronxites. However, ironically, far too few Bronxites have access to fresh, healthy, and affordable foods. How would you not only reduce food insecurity, but give Bronxites power in their food system?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, hats off to the Teamsters in Hunts Point. I was very proud to stand with them 2 days before the strike got called. And this issue of food insecurity has been exacerbated by COVID-19. We have seen the mutual aid groups that have sprouted up as a result of the needs of community members, neighbors stepping up to address the needs of their neighbors when the city has failed us. I think this is really an issue of our economy, and we really need to focus on building and increasing local owned, locally produced food sources that provide increased access to quality, healthy food for all of our neighbors. We often talk about food deserts, but the reality of it is, a desert actually implies that there was something once there that has dried up. There's too much food apartheid in our communities in the Bronx. Communities where residents are more than 5 minutes away from a fresh piece of fruit or vegetables. So we have to actually increase communities' ability to own, to farm, to generate and access their own healthy food. And we have to make a concerted effort to do that by prioritizing that moving forward. And that's what I would do.
Thank you very much. Same question for you, Mr. Donovan.
Thanks, Gary. This is an issue that we have to change in the Bronx. It affects every child, every family, and fundamentally, one of the reasons that we've seen COVID disproportionately devastate the Bronx is because of the health disparities and food disparities that made this a crisis even before COVID hit. This is something I've worked on my entire career, and I just want to be very specific. I've walked the walk here, not just talk the talk on ending food insecurity. First, let me talk about Villa Verde. I announced my campaign on Brook Avenue at Villa Verde in December. It is the healthiest, most sustainable, affordable housing in the country. It's that way because we sat with residents before we even started the design process and asked them what they wanted. And they said they wanted the healthiest, affordable housing. And what did that mean? It meant vegetable gardens and fruit trees growing on the roofs that the kids there pick and serve at their own dinner tables. Ruben Diaz Jr. said when we cut the ribbon for it, that let it be known where the Bronx was once burning, we are now building gardens in the sky. That's the housing that we need to build. When this pandemic hit, I raised over $1 million to put into restaurants in the South Bronx and the Bronx more broadly, like Bistro, to cook hot, fresh emergency meals to make sure that everyone in the Bronx was getting good quality food. That's the kind of mayor we need in this city.
Thank you very much, Mr. Donovan. We'll just keep moving right along. Let's talk about transportation. Subway service in the Bronx moves only north and south, leading to long commutes across town for work, school, healthcare, and community. Would you invest in Bronx bus and bicycle infrastructure to connect the borough and address traffic deserts in the Bronx? But noting that in some cases, these so-called road diets were not well received by local Bronx communities. Also, we expect to get 4 new Metro North stations in the future. Are there other transportation or MTA infrastructure improvements that can help this problem?
Absolutely. We need to provide more options for transportation across the Bronx. Let's step back though. What we have to recognize is that this is an issue of equity, like every issue in the city. And the Bronx has been left behind and forgotten for too long. When I launched my campaign, one of the signature ideas I talked about when I was there on Brook Avenue is that we have to reorient and reimagine the way we plan in the city to create what I call 15-minute neighborhoods. If you live in a wealthy neighborhood in New York, you know what a 15-minute neighborhood is. But too many neighborhoods in the Bronx don't. Every New Yorker should have within 15 minutes of their front door a great public school, access to real rapid transportation to get them to a job that sustains their family, access to fresh food, a park, and everything else you need to succeed, good healthcare. Transportation is central to that. And here's what my transportation plan would do. It's the most comprehensive, broadest transportation plan. I am a big believer that while we need to expand the subway system, bus rapid transit is the single most important investment we can make. What does that mean? It means buses that actually can control signals to move rapidly through the city, that creates 21st century streets with bike lanes, with platforms that make it easy to get on and off for seniors and people with disabilities. True bus rapid transit can transform the Bronx.
Thank you very much. And so, Ms. Morales, of course, the same question for you.
Great. Not a lot of disagreement with Sean. The MTA is facing a significant revenue shortfall, but what we can control actually is increased access and increased availability of bus routes, of express buses, and additional routes in general. I think that we really, too many parts of the Bronx, having worked there for the last decade, too many parts of the Bronx lack access to reliable public transportation. And so we need to expand the lanes and expand the express lanes in particular, as well as the local bus routes lanes. I also think we need to significantly focus on promoting safe, efficient, and accessible options that would include, for pedestrians, that would include for cyclists, and that would include for folks that are in the sort of outer edges of the Bronx and rely on vehicle transportation access in that way as well. That's the answer to that question. I think we need to control the things that we can control immediately on the bus route side, and then work at the state level to expand train routes as well.
Thank you very much. Let's move across to something that's probably right at the top of everybody's list, and that is health equity. It is no secret that the borough of the Bronx ranks 62nd of the 62 counties of New York State in health outcomes. While this condition has inspired the #Not62 campaign, our outcomes have not yet changed, which is underscored by the devastation of the pandemic to Bronx families. How would you change long-term health outcomes in the Bronx? And I guess that goes to you, Ms. Morales.
Great. I think the first thing we need to focus on to change long-term outcomes is education and prevention. We need to provide our communities with access to healthcare information in linguistically and culturally appropriate ways. The Bronx is home to a diverse richness of languages and cultures. We need to have trusted, community messengers who reflect the community, providing information to the community about healthcare, helping them to navigate the system and helping them to access the resources. But in the immediate, one of the things that we need to do, the city is currently failing in the vaccine rollout. Again, we need to protect and save the lives of our Bronx residents. We need to help them access the care that is available right now, and we need to do it in, again, a linguistically and culturally appropriate way. I am also a big proponent in the need for us to develop and expand the existence of integrated community healthcare clinics that are available at the local level to neighbors and residents, that can access both preventative care and sort of local intervention care that's not emergency and that's not surgical, so that those services are available and accessible to people locally in their communities.
Thank you very much, Mr. Donovan. Healthcare.
Well, first of all, Gary, we have to make sure that everyone has the chance to have health insurance, so they don't have to make decisions between taking care of their kids, their own health, and putting food on the table. My plan would create a true public option in New York City that would cover everyone, including folks who are undocumented. We need to recognize the more than 600,000 New Yorkers that aren't covered by healthcare. Half of those are undocumented folks. We absolutely need healthcare coverage for every New Yorker. But we also know that it's not just healthcare coverage, it's the underlying inequality that has driven the health disparities that have been so desperately exposed by COVID. And my idea for 15-minute neighborhoods goes directly to this. Every single Bronxite, every single New Yorker should have within 15 minutes of their door a good hospital. They should have access to preventive care and prenatal care. They should have access to crisis mental health care, as well as everything that they need to get them that care within their neighborhoods by a trusted provider who speaks their language and knows their needs. But what we also need is to deal with the underlying challenges as well that aren't just about healthcare itself. We already talked about access to fresh food and how important that is. We also need to make sure that everyone has access within 15 minutes of their front door of a park where they can exercise, and make sure their kids are not just safe, but also being able to get the exercise they need to live healthy lives and attack those underlying health disparities. Those are all things we need to do. That's what I did at Villa Verde. There's a health clinic there in addition to the food I talked about growing on the roofs.
Thank you very much. I guess we're going to go to you, Mr. Donovan. This is a two-part question, but if you look at housing in the Bronx and in the city of New York, you probably need about 15 different parts to cover this properly. But let's start here. A recent announcement by Housing Rights Initiative, a citywide housing watchdog group, said that the organization had uncovered over 1,500 properties across the city that were receiving 421A tax benefits, but not complying with the requisite rent stabilization rules. Also, needless to say, there were numerous problems over the last several years and historically through NYCHA. So what is your plan to ensure that the city proactively investigates landlord tax benefit fraud? And will you commit to holding those found cheating accountable? And then, of course, is there more that can be done at NYCHA other than waiting for a federal funding package?
Well, Gary, this is great timing because I just released the most comprehensive, most aggressive affordable housing plan of any of the candidates in the race. And I think you know that I've spent my entire career starting with volunteering in a homeless shelter in college and coming to work in the Bronx for a nonprofit right when I got out of school. I've spent my whole career working on these issues of affordable housing. Absolutely, we need greater enforcement, not just around 421A, but around all of the infractions, the evictions, the victimization of residents, particularly in the Bronx. We also need stronger enforcement on fair housing. I was the person in the Obama administration who led the fair housing efforts. That's why Donald Trump was attacking me last year for that work. And we need someone, a mayor, who understands how to actually make enforcement real so that every person can find a decent place to live. We also need to save NYCHA. More people live in public housing in New York City than live in Atlanta, Georgia.
30 seconds.
We need to make sure folks understand this is the single most precious affordable housing, permanently affordable housing resource that we have. And I've put out an aggressive plan to save it. We do need to put dramatically more city money in. I've made a commitment to put $2 billion more in city capital every year into NYCHA, but we also need a mayor who understands how to get the help we need from Washington.
Okay, we're
Nobody
done.
in this race knows how to do that because of my relationships with President Biden and with Congress.
Thank you very much. Ms. Morales, housing. Sure, do it in a minute. Go ahead.
I gotcha. The first thing I will say is that I am a strong proponent of housing for all. New York City needs to commit to providing housing for every single New Yorker right now, no matter what. We have seen over the course of the last 12 months that you cannot extricate public health or public safety from housing. So we need to make that commitment. And to me, part of that, what that means fundamentally is that the housing model that we have ascribed to historically just doesn't work. The speculative commodification of housing that panders to developers for profit does not work. We need to reinvest in our communities by prioritizing
50.
all of the funding that we give to developers as tax incentives or tax breaks or tax abatements. We need to provide that funding directly to communities. We need to increase the availability of social and cooperative housing, and we need to take advantage of the bill that Representative Velasquez has introduced to Congress so that we can bring NYCHA back to where it needs to be.
Thank you very much. Moving along to something that I think a lot of people don't talk a lot about, and that is culture and budgets and funding for culture in the city of New York. Last year, the city decimated culture budgets by 60%. The full expenditure on these programs is a paltry $6 million for the entire city. Yet there is extensive data that programs like music and art keep children in school, keep them engaged and focused, and improve their SAT scores. It also lowers crime, especially youth crime. These are important staple programs that have been cut for thousands of Bronx children. If you are mayor, will you make a commitment to fund music and arts programs to keep crime down and help children achieve in schools? And that is for you, Ms. Morales.
Thank you so much, Gary. So, I think the idea that music and arts programs are extras or extracurriculars or enhancements is part of the problem. The reality of it is that our children learn in all kinds of different ways, and music and arts provide an additional outlet for our children to learn. As the mother of a daughter with learning differences, I can tell you that it wasn't until she discovered the arts that her learning trajectory changed dramatically. We have to recognize not only the role that music and arts plays in education, but also in health and mental health, as a healing, as an art, as a therapy. These things are not supplemental. They are actually at the core of creating a healthy society with citizens and residents who are able to thrive. So yes, I would commit to supporting music and the arts.
Thank you very much. Mr. Donovan, that goes to you.
Thanks, Gary. And I want to agree with Diane here. I'm also the dad of a child who's had learning challenges. He's a musician, and when he found music, he found his life, he found his passion, and it changed his life. And that wouldn't have happened if he hadn't been introduced to it in school. So I completely agree with Diane's point there. And we have to make sure it isn't an extra in school. I think we need to go farther than that too, which is we have an underlying challenge of our schools being deeply segregated across this city. We know that arts-based schools, dual language schools, and others can be incredibly powerful for academic achievement and also to create greater integration and racial equity in our schools. That's something we need to focus on. And we need to drive arts-based community development. What does that mean? As housing secretary, I led an effort called Art Place that invested in arts as a core for how we redevelop communities in an authentic, indigenous way and avoid gentrification.
Thank you very much. I guess this goes back to you, Mr. Donovan. This is about policing in the city of New York, a very vital issue, not only for the Bronx, but across the city. In June, a Black Lives Matter protest in the South Bronx turned into a free-for-all as the NYPD kettled in protesters and in many cases beat them, arrested, and incarcerated them. While the mayor and police commissioner said the department handled the situation perfectly, ultimately, an investigation showed just the opposite. The state attorney general is now suing the city over their handling of the event. There's a class action suit, and it appears we are far from hearing the end of this. So what issues need to be addressed in the NYPD to improve police tactics, as well as instill community confidence in their police force?
Gary, we have to be clear that the outrageous behavior that you just described against protesters is un-American. It's not who we are as New Yorkers, and it has to end. And we need broader reform as well. And my criminal justice plan would do three fundamental things. It would reimagine policing, reduce the role of the police in our communities to focus on guns and violent crime, the things that communities are concerned about, and it would reinvest in communities to put the justice back in our criminal justice system.
30 seconds.
Reimagining means real accountability and transparency for the police. Reducing means stopping our police from patrolling the hallways of our schools or criminalizing homelessness. And reinvesting means taking money away from our correction system, which is failing, and investing it in housing, job training, all of the things that we know can break the cycle of incarceration. Those are the three things we have to do to change policing in this city.
Thank you very much. Ms. Morales, let's talk policing.
Sure, let's talk policing. Crime and violence arise out of poor economic and social conditions. Safe communities arise out of communities that are well-resourced, not communities that are over-policed. Over the past 40 years, police spending has grown faster than all types of other local spending. In New York City, we spend more on the police and corrections than on the agencies that offer a safety net and invest in human capital for our residents. Policing does nothing to address the challenges of homelessness, of public health, of the need for jobs. Creating safe communities means creating communities with those resources and investing in that human capital. So not only will I defund the NYPD and work to reinvest in our social safety net, I'm also going to create the Community First Responders Department, since we know that a large number of calls to 911 are not related to crimes in progress. They are, in fact, situations that require someone who is trained in de-escalating and intervention and connecting people to the services and the programs that they need.
Thank you very much. Candidates, we have come to the part of the program where we're going to offer you the opportunity to deliver closing statements. I will remind viewers, this is the first part of a two-part program on the mayoral candidates, and we will have the second part of it right after we do the closing statements and take a short break, and 5 mayoral candidates will join us at that time. So according to our process, Mr. Donovan, you are the first to deliver a 1-minute closing statement.
Gary, thank you so much for having me today. I became a public servant because I grew up in this city at a different time of crisis. My father's an immigrant who grew up in Costa Rica and Lima, Peru, and came to this city and found opportunity. But as a child, I saw around me so many that didn't have that same opportunity. And that lit a fire in me to work on behalf of the Bronx and this city to help rebuild a city that works for everyone. I started working for a nonprofit right on near Arthur Avenue in the Bronx, and helped to rebuild communities that had been devastated as I watched as a child. I ended up leading through crisis in ways that no other candidate has. I was housing commissioner in the city in the wake of 9/11. President Obama asked me to lead the housing department in the midst of the worst housing crisis of our lifetimes. When Sandy hit our shores, he asked me to lead back this city better and stronger and safer. I understand that in this moment of crisis, we need to not just repair and rebuild this city, but to reimagine it as a city that works for everyone. I have the experience and the campaign of ideas that can do that in the Bronx and across New York.
Thank you. Mr. Donovan, thank you very much. Ms. Morales, so your closing statement.
Thanks, Gary. So I'm a first-generation Puerto Rican who was born and raised in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, to a working-class family. I'm also the single mother of 2 who's raised her children in the same community while I became a successful executive and leader of human service organizations. I spent the last decade working in the South Bronx to help support and elevate communities there. I successfully created an education enrichment program that was replicated citywide across every publicly funded after-school program. And I launched a career training program in healthcare by building cross-sector partnerships with private employers. This city is a part of my core. It's a part of my center. I am here because I believe that now is the time for us to make a decision that we're not going back.
15 seconds.
That we have seen the ravages of systems and structures that are deeply rooted in racism and oppression. And we have an opportunity now to make a change and go in a different direction. The problem is not our money. The problem is that we have not had the political leadership and commitment to make the changes. I will do that for New York City, and I will do that for the Bronx.
Well, thank you very much, Diane Morales and Sean Donovan. We certainly appreciate your participation. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll be joined by 5 candidates. And I think I want to speak for all the candidates that we were sorry that Andrew Yang couldn't join us this evening. He, as many people know, fell ill and was unable to join us. But again, thank you to Diane Morales and Sean Donovan. You are watching a special edition of Bronx Talk. It is the Bronx Mayoral Forum presented by the Bronx Democratic County Committee and BronxNet. We'll be right back. Okay, back with you on Bronx Talk tonight. It's the Bronx Mayoral Forum, sponsored by the Bronx County Democratic Committee and BronxNet. Let's meet our second group of candidates who are running for mayor, the Brooklyn Borough President, a former NYPD captain, and a founder of 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care. It is Eric Adams. Mr. Adams, nice to have you with us.
Thank you, Gary.
A former director of operations at the city's Department of Environmental Protection, and most recently the commissioner of the Department of Sanitation, Ms. Catherine Garcia. Ms. Garcia, nice to have you. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Great to be in the Bronx.
The former vice chairman of Citigroup and a board member of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace for Lincoln Center and the New York Public Library. It is Raymond McGuire. Mr. McGuire, nice to have you, sir.
Thank you for having me, Gary. Great to be in the Bronx.
Let's say good evening to the New York City Controller, former Manhattan Borough President, and former State Assembly member. It is Scott Stringer. Welcome back to Bronx Talk.
It's to be back again.
And also a former chair of the Civilian Complaint Review Board and former legal analyst for NBC News and MSNBC. It is Maya Wiley. Nice to have you with us, Ms. Wiley.
Good to be in a BX. Thank you, Gary.
That's language I can appreciate. By prior agreement, our first question will go to you, Ms. Wiley. Let's talk about economic development. The Bronx is home to Cooperative Home Care Associates, which is the largest worker cooperative in the country. Worker cooperatives and employee share-owned plan companies, those are ESOPs, allow workers to capture the profits of their collective labor. Is this a viable tool to include as we continue to grow the economy after the pandemic? And what other concepts do you think will work to help Bronx businesses?
Yeah, I actually think it's a brilliant model and a critical tool, and we will build more worker cooperative opportunities when I'm mayor. And let me just start by saying that we already also have a big and bold plan that is focused on communities of concern who were ravaged by COVID, as we saw in the Bronx, with the highest infection and death rates, and with the discrimination of vaccine distribution that we've seen from incompetence. But what we are going to do is spend $10 billion in capital construction
30
in
seconds.
order to solve community problems. It will create 100,000 new jobs. We will focus it on also local targeted hiring, women and minority-owned business contracts,
15
how we
seconds.
source, and we will do that in partnership with community because we want the projects to also solve other problems like creating space for worker cooperatives.
Thank you very much. Mr. Adams, for you, economic development.
Thank you. And I have my stopwatch here.
Okay.
First of all, it is extremely important that we support the workers' cooperatives. The majority of them are women and minority owned. It's an excellent concept, but how do we go even further? By looking at our current procurement process here in the city. We need to look at some of the procurement we do in this city and localize it. There's no reason these worker cooperatives cannot provide some of the food services that we're seeing. There's no reason these cooperatives can't sell some of the cleaning supplies to where many of the inmates from on Rikers Island come from. So this is extremely important. We also should build out a pipeline to assist others who want to start these workers cooperative, give them the support they need. Great concept. It needs to be expanded throughout the city. Let's keep our tax dollars here.
Thank you very much. Ms. Garcia, the same question for you about economic development.
I think that is a wonderful model, having people invested in the work that they do and getting the benefit from the profit that they create is something that we need to expand. But we know that the city is really confronting dire economic conditions. We need to support our small businesses. They are the drivers of employment across the city. That means we're going to have to provide low interest or recoverable grants to them, particularly for rent as we move forward, as well as making sure that we have real educational ladders from our CUNY system into the private sector and the public sector. As I like to say as sanitation commissioner, I had trouble finding auto mechanics, and we have an automotive high school. I know that the Bronx can rise and be part of a real rebirth in the city of New York.
Thank you very much. Let's go to Controller Scott Stringer.
Well, I do like the worker model because I do think equity and having a stake in a company and a small business is a key to upward mobility. But like many of my colleagues, these are not ordinary times. And talking about issues, as Eric mentioned about procurement, the reality is out of our $23 billion city spend on hiring law firms, accounting firms, food vendors, a whole host of services we contract for, less than 5% of that money goes to women and minority-owned businesses. And if we're really serious about creating wealth in our communities, we're going to have to confront this inequity. And it's something I've taken Bill de Blasio to task on for many years. We need a chief diversity officer and a system in place to break down those contracts and reinvest with so many of the small businesses in the Bronx.
Thank you very much. The same question then will go to Mr. McGuire.
Listen, this is at the core of how the city recovers. When you look at my economic development plan, at its core is the small businesses and making sure that we invest in these small businesses, 50,000 which I have identified in my Job Accelerator program, where we will we'll pay for 50% of the wages. We will make certain that the sales tax receipts that they generate over a year that they get to keep, and we'll also give them relief when it comes to their utilities and their rent. We need to change the way we build things. Every project should start with the community and be led by the community. One great example of development here in the Bronx is what we did at the Spotswood Juvenile Detention Center. Change that into affordable housing, open space, artist studios, and manufacturing businesses. We need to support our small businesses. They're the core to the city, and then the core of the Bronx, and the core of the survival of this great city as we build our way out of this great crisis.
Candidates, thank you very much. Let's go to question number 2. And this will be directed at first to Eric Adams, then everybody else can weigh in on it. Mr. Adams, let's talk food justice. The Hunts Point Food Cooperative was in the news lately because of a labor strike that is now settled. But the whole episode underscores that this is one of the most important and largest food distribution centers in the country. In fact, many food service workers throughout the city are people of the Bronx. However, ironically, far too few Bronxites have access to fresh, healthy, and affordable foods. How would you not only reduce food insecurity, but give Bronxites power in their food system?
A real conversation. And, oftentimes people say the Bronx or believe that they are often ignored by the city. That's not a perception, that's a reality. The numbers speak for themselves. 1 in 5 Bronx resident, almost 23.1% experience food insecurity, and over 30% of them are children. And if you don't have access to healthy food, then you're going to have access to chronic diseases. This is something that your amazing Borough President, Ruben Diaz Jr., and I have talked about often. And so the goal is, let's look at first where we are feeding people. Our schools must stop feeding unhealthy food to our children. I was able to get the city to stop serving processed meat in our schools, a type 1 carcinogen. We need to also look at every area we are feeding people to make sure the food is healthy. We're not doing that now. We're feeding our crises. And then we need to think outside the box with some real agricultural initiatives.
Thank you very much. Ms. Garcia, let's talk food insecurity in the borough of the Bronx.
Yes, no, this is where I did so much work during COVID to ensure that the people of the Bronx had food. During the height of the crisis, 50% of the meals we were delivering or distributing were going to members of the Bronx community because of the need that was there. So I was in the Bronx constantly, but I also did stand with the Teamsters during their strike against the Hunt Point Market for $1 more an hour, so that they could actually be able to pay their rent and buy food
30 seconds.
themselves. But I have been very active in this space, not only ensuring that there is food available for all Bronx residents, but also ensuring that they can get the access they need to SNAP benefits and opening up a store front there so that they can come in and get the money so they can buy their own food. This is something that's very close to my heart. We have to ensure that there is food and fresh food access across the city, particularly in the Bronx.
Thank you very much. Mr. Stringer, you are next on the same question, food insecurity.
Whether it's places in the Bronx or in El Barrio, East Harlem, you could see the limited healthy food options throughout communities. And I believe that we have to, on the most local level, do what I did when I was Manhattan Borough President and set up what was called Go Green community committees to tackle the issues of high asthma rates, diabetes, and the issue of a lack of healthy food, meaning vegetables and all the things that prolong life. When I was Borough President, I published a cookbook called Go Green East Harlem. It was the recipes of community members that cooked healthy recipes in their own culture, because so much of city's communication is in one voice when we speak so many different voices throughout our city. And that's what we have to invest in for healthy communities.
Thank you very much. Mr. McGuire, same question for you.
I stood with the workers, and it's so critical that we continue to stand with these workers. When it comes to food, Biden expanded the SNAP program. The city has to do more to get direct outreach to the community, to partner with this so that more New Yorkers get signed up. We need affordable, healthy food options in neighborhoods. We need to expand, therefore, the city zoning and tax incentives to bring supermarkets, not just Whole Foods, places where working New Yorkers can afford. And the other thing that we do is, given the importance that some of the smaller delis and bodegas have, we need to expand the financing for the delis and bodegas so they can install refrigeration, so they can offer fresh produce, fresh fruit, and fresh vegetables. So this is something that we need to have the highest level of urgency to, so we can bring healthy diets to these communities, to the Bronx in specific. And I'm 100% in support of this.
Thank you very much. Ms. Wiley, you'll get the final word on this question.
Thank you. And, I'm running to be the next mayor of New York City because I believe this is a city where we all must be able to live with dignity. And that does mean jobs with a future. And the reason I say that, because I, like my colleagues, we walk the picket line at Hunts Point, talk to the men and women who are part of that work and that organizing. And here's the thing, the Bronx is the poorest borough in this city. And a big part of that is
30.
because we are not focused on jobs with justice. And that is part of why we have a food insecurity problem, just like a homelessness problem. It is about creating work with a future. That's why we're going to create 100,000 new jobs. And absolutely, we have to recognize that union
15.
labor is labor with dignity. And frankly, far too many food outlets do not provide union jobs, and we will work on that as well.
Candidates, thank you so much. Folks, if you're just tuning in, this is the Bronx Mayoral Forum presented by the Bronx Democratic County Committee and also BronxNet Television. The next question at first is directed to Catherine Garcia. Let's talk about transportation. Subway service moves only in north-south directions in the borough of the Bronx. It leads to long commutes cross town for work, for school, for healthcare, and for community, and for anything people want to do. Would you invest in Bronx bus and bicycle infrastructure to connect the borough to address these traffic deserts? But noting that some cases, these so-called road diets were not well received by local communities. Also, we expect to get 4 new Metro North stations in the future. Are there other transportation or MTA infrastructure improvements that can help address this situation? So that is for you, Ms. Garcia.
Yes, yes. I spent part of my Wednesday with someone who lived in the northwestern Bronx and actually worked in the southeastern Bronx. And so getting across, well, it was fine at 6 o'clock in the morning, but very challenging in the evening rush. And that's because we don't have enough east-west routes in the city for public transit. We need to create busways so that it is easy for people to ditch their cars and be able to take mass transit. But I also think you want bikeways that connect you to those subway lines, and that we need more of those electric bikes for people, or the pedal assist bikes for those of us who
15.
can make it up and down all of Bronx Hills. And so I view it as we need also a single ticket. If you get on Metro North, you should be able to easily transfer to a bus or to a subway.
Thank you very much. And let's move along to Controller Scott Stringer.
Look, the challenges in the Bronx in terms of transportation has gone on far too long. And I do commend Borough President Diaz for his fight for more Metro North stations. But here's something that I found incredible when you talk about discrimination and systemic racism. When I said that we should better align our subway system with the commuter rails so that we could have more options for commuters pre-pandemic, we learned that the Metro North coming from Connecticut, New Haven, Connecticut, would stop at Fordham Road and would not allow Bronxites to get on that commuter rail. I stopped that because at the end of the day, we have got to make sure that everyone is treated equally in the transportation system. And just because you can pay more from the suburbs, when you get to this city, you're going to treat our people equally as we expand the transportation network.
Thank you very much. Let's talk about getting around with Ray McGuire. Mr. McGuire.
Listen, as we've talked about, portions of the Bronx are in two-threat zones, and there are infrastructure projects that we need to push completion to. And I've identified in my economic recovery package 500,000 jobs, of which half of which go to small businesses, half of which go to making sure that we fix the infrastructure. We know that from a healthcare standpoint, the Bronx has got the highest asthma rate, one of, if not the highest asthma rate. So we need to begin to address that with projects like the Gateway Project. The 4 MTA stations, we need to focus on that. Hunts Point, Parkchester, Morris Park, we need to expand the transportation access. We also need to make sure that we accelerate the repairs in the subway elevators, which are now in a state of inoperability. So I will work with the MTA for that. And yes, invest in selected bus services in places without subway access. So we need to make sure that we focus on the transportation access in the Bronx and also alleviate some of the healthcare problems that are a result of the current healthway system, transportation system.
Thank you very much. Ms. Wiley, let's talk about transportation in the borough of the Bronx.
Let's talk about it because my godson lives in Soundview houses. And trying to get him through high school when he had to travel an hour and a half each way to school meant I brought him to my house and he lived with me so that he could get there in a half an hour instead, so that we could help him get through high school. That is not a solution available to too many people in the Bronx. As someone who's been a civil rights activist and a racial justice activist, transportation equity was an area I worked explicitly on. And that is why in our New Deal New York plan, we will work with communities on capital construction. And yes, that includes fixing our transit deserts, because just like food deserts, we have communities of color who are not connected to the opportunities and the places they need to get to, and we will fix that.
Thank you very much. Let's move along to Borough President Adams.
Thank you, and really kudos to the Bronx Borough President for getting the 4 new stations at Hunts Point, Parkchester, Van Ness, Morris Park, and Co-op City. He understood the connectivity and how important it is. And I also understand not only professionally, but personally. Growing up in South Jamaica, Queens, a 2-fare zone, having to really pay 2 fares to get to and from a location and to the central business district. And also, I know what we did here in Brooklyn with other advocates with the Freedom Ticket. There's no reason the MTA should continue to treat us like we are bastard children. We should have a clear connectivity between the ferry, between our Metro North, between our Long Island Railroads and the MTA. That's what we need to push for, and better access and alternative transportation. Let's continue to fight for that.
Thank you very much. I guess we're up to our next question, and we will start with Scott Stringer. Let's talk health equity. It's no secret that the Bronx ranks 62nd of the 62 counties of New York State in health outcomes. While this condition has inspired a very useful #Not62 campaign, the outcomes in the Bronx have not yet changed, which is underscored by the devastation of the pandemic to so many Bronx families. How would you change long-term health outcomes in the borough of the Bronx?
Well, my mother was born in the Bronx and she died in the Bronx, and she died of COVID. And my stepfather, Carlos Cuevas, the former deputy borough president of this borough at a time when Latinos were not elected like they are in today. He was a pioneer, and he couldn't see my mother in the final hours of her life. What the doctor said that night, and I talk about this a lot, was that this virus showed the discrimination in so many of our communities, especially in the Bronx. Black people dying, Latino people dying at the ages of 50 and 40. And yes, we have health disparities in this borough that must no longer be managed. We actually have to reinvest in communities to solve these problems. And it's going to take a real conversation with New York City to look at Brooklyn and look at the Bronx and look at our communities that have been ravaged by COVID because we discriminated through land use and zoning and through lack of healthcare options. And this is something we all have to be about.
Thank you very much. Mr. McGuire, it's a fundamental issue. I know you know that. Let's talk about health equity in the Bronx.
You know, I've been involved in trying to get healthcare issues addressed for a couple of decades now. We know that we live in the Bronx in some healthcare deserts, and we need to make sure that we address that. The city can fill in the gaps with hospitals and clinics, but we also need to make certain that we develop public-private partnerships. We need a private healthcare systems to increase the presence in these underserved communities. The city can help encourage this through zoning and financing, which is a way to begin to solve the problem. And so this problem, which is as fundamental as it is, needs to have an urgent and direct focus on how we eliminate, or at least reduce the healthcare deserts that exist by putting healthcare facilities into the communities, primary healthcare facilities into the communities.
15. Thank you very much. And I guess the same question then goes for Maya Wiley.
Yeah, when I'm mayor, this isn't going to be a conversation. It's going to be a conviction, and it's going to get done. Because when I was a civil rights attorney at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, I sued to keep maternal and child care beds in Harlem. Just a similar example of far too much healthcare infrastructure leaving our communities. But here's the other thing. You know, we have 600,000 residents in this city, far too many of them in the Bronx, who don't have health insurance.
30.
And that includes folks who are undocumented, of course, but even folks who are documented because they don't have benefits and they fall between the cracks. And we are working on a plan right now that's going to solve that, while we also solve the problem for our community clinics that are at risk of closing because they took on the burden of COVID when no one else would. And now they're $100 million in the hole, and we will dig them out. They will not close.
Thank you very much. Mr. Adams, same question.
Thank you. And really, we need to just point to the amazing job. Again, I keep going back to my colleague and friend, Ruben Diaz Jr., and what he did by putting the school-based health clinics. This is where our children are all the time. And I believe in the philosophy that I stated often. Archbishop Desmond Tutu states, we spend a lifetime pulling people out of the river. No one goes upstream and prevent them from falling in the first place. We must have an upstream government around healthcare. And by doing that, let's target those areas where we are in control. As mayor, I'm going to have my program like at Bellevue Hospital, where we're doing disease reversal and weaning people off their drugs and prescriptions.
15.
We're also going to have school-based health care, where we're going to teach people how to be more proactive and not reactive.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Garcia, this fundamental question for you.
Yes, no, this clearly highlighted absolute racial discrimination in healthcare writ large. And it is not only about healthcare access, but it's much broader. It's about economic opportunity. It's about housing. It's about air quality. But that is why when I am mayor, we'll start with prenatal health to ensure that those who are born in the Bronx are healthy. But we also need to expand, as Maya said, health insurance for everyone in the Bronx. But even having health insurance wasn't enough because there wasn't access. And so we need to expand both community health clinics, but also telehealth so that people who can't travel can get the services.
15 seconds.
And in addition to that, it has to be culturally competent. You need to have people who are from your community who are serving you medically and that you have language access as you move forward. Otherwise, you won't get the health care that you need.
Thank you very much. And I guess that brings us to our next question. Let's talk housing. This is a complex, good luck doing this in a minute. We do have a two-part question for you. A recent announcement by Housing Rights Initiative, a citywide housing watchdog group, said that the organization had uncovered over 1,500 properties across the city that were receiving 421A tax benefits, but not complying with the requisite rent stabilization rules. Also, needless to say, there are numerous problems at NYCHA. So what is your plan to ensure that the city proactively investigates landlord tax benefit fraud? And of course, would you commit to holding those found cheating accountable? And on the other side, is there more that can be done at NYCHA other than waiting for a federal funding package? Mr. McGuire?
Listen, the housing situation is deplorable. We know that in the Bronx, you have the highest foreclosures. You have code violations that are the highest. We have severe rent burden. And we also know that up to this point, we've not addressed the housing shortages. My plan, which is the largest infrastructure plan, is to do just that. And we need to make certain that the deplorable conditions that exist here, we need to address those and have the full weight of the law to deal with those who have committed the fraud. We also need to recognize that we need to focus on truly affordable housing. For those low income between 15 and 30,000, we need to build truly affordable housing. I'm seeing apartments in Mott Haven that call an affordable rent for $2,200. That is not truly affordable. So we need to work to address the issues that are acute in NYCHA. We also need to make sure that we build truly affordable housing.
Thank you very much. Ms. Wiley, so many of these are fundamental questions. Let's talk housing in the Bronx.
Yeah, and I'm going to look, I'm a lawyer who, when I sat in City Hall, made sure that we sued Verizon, for example, because it wasn't doing what it committed to do for our residents. And that is something we will be very aggressive about when I am mayor. Nobody gets to take tax dollars from us and then not perform or produce. But on the other side is absolutely, we have to create more affordable housing. And it has to be everything from starting with recognizing, and this is
30.
true in the Bronx, far too many people are about to be evicted. So we need to address that. We need higher rent subsidies in addition to creating more very affordable housing. And on NYCHA, let me just say, I already have $2 billion in my capital construction plan for New Deal New York, and I don't need any permission from anybody
50.
for that money. And residents will have a voice in saying what the priorities of that spend will be, who are NYCHA residents.
Thank you very much. Borough President Adams, your thoughts.
Yes, thank you, Gary. And this is at the heart of why I'm running for mayor. Our city is dysfunctional, and we have a scatter and pray mindset, and we guess our way along. I use this concept all the time. If you don't inspect, what you expect is all suspect. I try to get the city to embrace a CompStat model of monitoring our housing stock. And as we trend towards where we want to go, I had both HPD and the courts on board, but I couldn't get the other city and state agencies to come together. We need a system in place, not only to talk about how many units of housing we're going to build, but we need to be able to ensure we protect preservation and make sure that we don't allow that we lose these precious housing stocks that we have, and then we need to point towards the future at the same time.
Thank you very much. Ms. Garcia, let's talk about where people live.
Absolutely. And anyone who's committing fraud against the city of New York needs to be taken to task and go to jail. I'm sorry. Like, you're not allowed to do that. But more broadly, what the city should do is we need to leverage federal dollars to renovate NYCHA, to make it so that they get new bathrooms, new elevators, new kitchens. That's absolutely critical. It's a $40 billion hole. We can access that money today and make sure that we are preserving that for the
30
future.
seconds.
But we also need to continue to build. And I agree, it needs to be deeply affordable housing that we are building across the city, and protect our rent stabilized stock as well. We have a cliff coming with the eviction moratorium ending in the not too distant future. There's got to be a plan in place to ensure that those people do not become homeless as a cause of COVID.
Thank you very much. Let's see, Scott Stringer, housing.
Look, City Hall, going back as far as 2014, made a deal with luxury developers to build affordable housing. And what happened is, in places like the Bronx, they ended up building affordable housing. That's what Ray's talking about with $2,200 a month rents. I want to change that with a specific plan. First, city-owned property that we all own, give that land back to the people. Give it to community-based organizations, and build the housing that we
30
actually
seconds.
need. 30% of the people in homeless shelters have jobs, no housing. And this has to be a paradigm shift. Finally, with NYCHA, I've been in most NYCHA developments, but I've also investigated a lot of them. And the truth is, management to actually improve the lives of people. I have
15
done
seconds.
the audits. I know the roadmap. We need a federal, but we also need our own response to how we can infuse NYCHA with the resources and management that we need to finally improve the lives of the 400,000 people who live in NYCHA developments.
Thank you very much. Candidates, let's talk about the culture in the city of New York. Last year, the city decimated culture budgets by 60%. The full expenditure on these programs, which are so vital, is a paltry $6 million for the entire city. Yet there is extensive data that programs like music and art keep children in school, keep them engaged and focused, and improve their SAT scores. It also lowers crime, especially youth crime. These are important staple programs that have been cut out for thousands of Bronx children. If you are mayor, will you make a commitment to fund music and arts programs to keep crime down and help children achieve in schools? And our first candidate to respond to that would be Maya Wiley. Ms. Wiley?
Yes, Yes, and yes. And I say that with a brother who has an art degree, a mother who earned an art gallery. I know how central it is, particularly music, as an example of improving math learning. This isn't enrichment. This isn't something extra or an add-on. But let me say one other thing, because one of the things that I will do as mayor is create a gun violence prevention program. And we've already said this publicly. We're going to create participatory justice funds for communities that have high rates of gun violence. And with those funds, communities can say what additionally they want to do. $18 million, we're going to take it from the NYPD's budget, and we are going to put it in the hands, just like we do participatory budgeting, but participatory justice, so that communities can say trauma-informed care, more jobs, and yes, and different kinds of programs for students in school and after school, including arts and music.
Thank you very much. Let's move along to Mr. Adams.
Thank you. Good question. And, what did they know during the Great Depression that we're not understanding now? They put almost the equivalent of $400 million into arts and culture during the Great Depression, because they understood the power of art and the power of having the music and having theater. That is what we need to do now, and stop treating it, as Maya stated, stop treating it as a luxury. It is a necessity. This research is clear. People overcome trauma easier if they're able to use artistic ways to express it and to view it. This is a great opportunity to ensure that not only we look at our big cultural groups, it's time for them to come into the communities and assist more. If a young man has the steel of a saxophone in his hand, he won't have the steel of a gun in his hand.
Thank you very much. Ms. Garcia, a very fundamental question in the Bronx and throughout the city of New York. How do we fund culture?
Art and music is central to who we are as New York City residents, all of us, including the Bronx. It is what makes New York City special. It's what attracts people to this city. And it also is fundamental to our mental health. It has to be essential in the same way that math and science are essential in our schools. It also makes it so that you are creative. It's not the function of knowing how to code. It's knowing how to design the system that you are coding for, which is all about creating critical thinking and really ability to give creative ideas. So music and art are at the core of what I have been talking about as we move forward, and I would see it in every public school.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Scott Stringer, Mr. Controller.
Yeah, let me get specific. So when I first became controller, we did a study to show where the certified arts teachers were, where the arts curriculum was, and where the funding was. No surprise, the Bronx had very few certified arts teachers, and Central Brooklyn had barely any. Bill de Blasio called me up at the time and he said, "Is this true? Are you for sure telling me that we don't have funded arts, certified arts education teacher?" I said, "The numbers don't lie, Mr. Mayor." And then we built out a public-private partnership to get those arts teachers into the schools. We have a lot more to do, but the only way we're going to invest in our children is we invest equally. When I was going to John F. Kennedy High School and I graduated Kennedy, we had a real arts program in the midst of this fiscal crisis. We had kids playing instruments, as Eric mentioned. I was not one of those kids. I could barely play the kazoo, but I remember that the resources made us all feel just a little special on the night when the kids came out and played what they had learned. We should be doing this for every single kid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Controller. We'll remember not to ask you to sing, but that's okay. Nonetheless, let's move along to Ray McGuire.
Yeah, this is something that I haven't talked about. I've been about it for 3 decades. The arts are essential. I've been involved in investing in arts education, in arts, and celebrating culture. We need to invest in the large institutions like the Bronx Zoo to the smaller base institutions like what they're doing at the Hip Hop Museum, about which I've talked to the founders of the museum, I've talked to the borough president about. These are essential, but we also need to invest in the small organizations like Prager Traveling Theater. And also, if you look at my comeback plan, what is included there is a comeback festival, which includes the celebration of emerging artists, open spaces, generating revenue to boost tourism and
15
after
seconds.
COVID. You remember, the Bronx gave us hip hop. And so if we think about what the Bronx can do, if we invest in the Bronx, arts education, celebration of culture will define who we are going forward. And the Bronx is going to be at the center of that, just as it's been the center of what's happened for the past two or three decades, especially in hip hop. So yes, actually actively committed to the arts.
Thank you very much. Candidates, we have one more question to go. And as I review what we've done, all of them are essential questions. And I guess this one qualifies as well. Let's talk about NYPD and policing. The first whack at it will be Mr. Adams. In June, a Black Lives Matter protest in the South Bronx turned into a free-for-all as the NYPD kettled in protesters and in many cases beat them, arrested, and incarcerated them. While the mayor and police commissioners said the department handled this situation, quote unquote, perfectly, an investigation showed just the opposite. The state attorney general is suing the city over their handling of the event. There's a class action suit, and it appears we are far from hearing the end of this. So the question is, what issues need to be addressed in the NYPD to improve police tactics, as well as instill community confidence in their police force? And that is for you, Mr. Adams.
Thank you so much. And two things are important here when you talk about even that moment. Number one, we must rebuild trust in our police department and with the community. Because up on Fordham Road, there were those who used the righteous protest of Black Lives Matter to destroy small shops and small stores in a very professional way. And we should not have to surrender public safety through our fight for justice. They go together. And that march was a continuation of my career. I spent over 22 years after being arrested as a child in the police and fighting for reform. I'm committed to it. It's time to rebuild trust. I spoke about having local community leaders choose their precinct commanders and have veto power. We should go further than what the mayor has stated. We should also change the ecosystem of public safety to engage young people, crisis management team, and others. We can do this and we can build trust.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adams. A very fundamental question for many people in the Bronx. Let's talk policing with Catherine Garcia.
Black Lives Matter. My brother Matthew's life matters. But we also need to see that we have police that are effective. I was out at the protest. Kettling does not work. It makes it so that there is increased tension. And as the borough president mentioned, I was also on Bainbridge Avenue the morning after which it was looted and talking to those small business owners and cleaning up after what was really criminal acts. And we do need to separate what were peaceful protests for what were criminal acts.
30 seconds.
But I have a plan to reform the police. I'm the only one who's ever managed a uniform agency. You have to have strict accountability. We need to increase the age of new recruits to 25. We need to have them live within the city limits. I know that requires state law. We also need to celebrate those police officers who are doing the right thing and making connections with communities so that everyone feels that PD is their guardian.
Thank you very much. The next comment on this question will be from Scott Stringer. Mr. Stringer.
I found the way the police department handled the peaceful protests in the city to be just unbelievably outrageous. When I'm mayor, I'm going to have a police commissioner that aligns with my values, and we are going to make sure that we hold the police accountable to safety and civil rights. They're not mutually exclusive. When we have mental health calls, we should send mental health experts out to work in our communities to keep our kids away from cops and the criminal justice.
30 seconds.
And we also have to make sure that we use all the tools we have to create a safe city that will continue to bring our economy back. I grew up in Washington Heights back in the 70s. My parents are from the Bronx, and I can tell you, we all want the same thing. We want safety, but we need a different paradigm to make sure the city can move forward. And the civil rights of individuals and our kids is fundamental to how they grow up. It's why I was one of the first to say end, stop, and frisk, and a number of police reforms. We can create a safe city through this lens.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stringer. Ray McGuire, let's talk about policing in the city of New York.
Listen, Kettling and Mott Haven are just indicative of just how out of control the relationship between the police and the community is. It cannot happen again. We need to instruct, we need to inform, we need to make sure that we have a culture in the police department I call being respectful, accountable, and proportionate. We need to return the respect, which has now been breached. The police need to be held accountable, and we need to make certain that the response is proportionate. It has been said that if the only thing that you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When it comes to Black and brown communities, it looks like it's a sledgehammer. So we need to restructure, and have better policing, which is the way that the police commissioner that I appoint will make sure that they follows
15.
respect, accountability, and proportionality to develop some relationship between the community and the police, which now has been breached.
Thank you very much. Ms. Wiley, you'll get the final word on this question.
So I've been Black all my life. And I say that because Black Lives Matter is not a slogan to me. And it is the reason I became a civil rights lawyer and a racial justice advocate. It is the reason why I helped establish a criminal justice reform program in South Africa after apartheid. It is the reason that I sat on the New York Civilian Complaint Review Board as chair and made sure we got Daniel Pantaleo, the officer who killed Eric Garner, over to the police department with charges, which finally got him off the force. But here's the thing, we have to put the public back in public safety. And that means we have to recognize that we have a bloated department that has been given a pass, that needs transformational leadership. That means firing Shea. It means making sure we are investing our public dollars in our most precious resources, which with our people, and not criminalizing poverty, which is essentially what we have done for literally generations. And it will stop when I am mayor.
Thank you very much. Candidates, we've reached the time in the program where you will be able to deliver your closing statements. I just want to say on behalf of the Bronx Democratic County Committee and BronxNet, and also the people of the Bronx, you have demonstrated not only in this segment, but the candidates in the previous segment, the absolute best of our democracy. If we can't find out who seeks our vote, then we really are lost. So I do want to thank you for your participation this evening. And let's start off our closing statements with Maya Wiley. You each have 1 minute. Ms. Wiley?
Thank you so much, Gary. And look, somos una ciudad, un pueblo. And what we have to do right now is come together and recognize that we have the ability to do more than recover from COVID, that we have the ability to use this crisis as a way that calls us to transforming what was broken before COVID. And far too much of that is exactly what you have experienced in the Bronx, which is a disinvestment. It is a failure to see all our people as people who have dignity, and that what we are trying to recover is not just January 2020, but we are trying to recover what we love about this city, and it's the ability for us all to be here, all to be able to develop without displacement, to be able to have a school system that sees every one of our kids as excellent, and to ensure that we have jobs with the future and the ability to drive the direction of our communities. And when I am mayor, that is the partnership that we will have, and that is the reimagining that will be real.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wiley. We appreciate your participation this evening. Let's talk to Eric Adams. Let's get your closing statement, sir.
Thank you, Gary. And this BX is not unfamiliar to me. I know it so well because I spend so much time in the Bronx with my good friend Ruben Diaz Jr. Also know the great work that Jamal Bailey and your amazing Assembly member speaker, Carl Hastie, a team that has come together and finally sending a strong message. I remember pre-COVID, the spirit changed, the energy changed. Driving through the Bronx with Ruben one day, he pointed to a place where he used to jump on an old mattress in a torn down lot. He said, there's a new building there. We have a new energy in the Bronx. COVID hit and that momentum stopped. Bronx needs a partner. That is why I'm running for mayor. I am that partner. I understand the people of the Bronx, working class people, blue collar workers, blue collar people. I am your blue collar mayor. We have 70 years of white collar mayors. It's time for an ordinary person to understand ordinary people. I want to be your mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adams. And Ms. Garcia, your closing statement, please.
Gary, thank you so much for having me here. And thank you to everyone who is on and watching from the Bronx. I have been serving the Bronx for the last 14 years, whether or not I was delivering your water, picking up your garbage, plowing your snow, or delivering food during COVID to so many of you who were in need, and standing out there giving boxes of food away, though we didn't have pineapples for everyone at one of our distributions. But I am running because we need to have an economy that reopens. We need to be supporting small businesses. There has to be economic mobility for all, and that there's real opportunity coming out of our CUNY system, as well as our trade high schools. People need careers.
15.
And I know that I'm the one to deliver that, because we can't open up our economy without getting city services right. And I'm the only one who has actually done that over the course of my career.
Thank you very much. And let's go to Scott Stringer, your closing statement, sir.
Well, I'm very proud to be the only candidate for mayor who's represented the Bronx for the last 8 years. But, I grew up in Washington Heights, and when you grew up in Washington Heights, you didn't go downtown. You went uptown, and you went to the Bronx, and you went to Fordham Road, and you were able to see the great aspirational hope of that amazing borough called the Bronx. As I mentioned earlier in the program, my stepfather is a former deputy borough president of Bronx, Carlos Cuevas, and he worked very much to build this borough back. But what he always told me was that the Bronx is family. It's a bunch of people who may not have been recognized by the city, but a bunch of people who fought back anyway. Maybe not without the resources, maybe not without other communities got, but the Bronx came fighting back. I know this borough, and I know many of you. And as mayor, as I manage the hell out of the city, it's going to be through the lens of what the Bronx has meant to me, what the Bronx has meant to my family. And that's the only way we can rebuild our economy, if we think differently.
Thank you.
And we think boldly. And that's what I'm going to try to do. Thank you, Gary, for this opportunity.
Thank you. And our final closing statement of the evening will be from Ray McGuire. Mr. McGuire.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you, Bronx. When I was at Citi, which is my prior job, I wrote a report that talked about the systemic and the impact the systemic inequities have had on the U.S. economy, and especially in places like the Bronx. On October the 15th, I called my 94-year-old mother and said, "Mama, I quit my job." She said, "Why would you do that? Was something going on?" I said, "No, Mama. I look across the city that has been great to me, and I look at places like the Bronx. In the city, we have 8% unemployment. In the Bronx, we have 16+% unemployment. And I know how to get people back to work. I have a plan that identifies how we recover the city and how I lead the greatest economic comeback, inclusive economic comeback in the history of the city. And what that means in specific is making certain that communities like the Bronx get involved, so that we get the community invested, involved, so we get capital to the community, so they have the jobs, so they can grow along with the growth in this great city. And that's why I'm running for mayor.
Thank you very much. And so for Maya Wiley, Eric Adams, Catherine Garcia, Scott Stringer, and Raymond McGuire, and then in our previous segment, Sean Donovan and Diane Morales, we thank you all for joining us. While you might not agree on everything, I know you will agree with me that every eligible voter should vote on June 22nd. Please note that voting can be done by absentee ballot. You can get your ballot by visiting vote.nyc. And for some of the mayoral primary information, the primary is June 22nd. You register to vote by May 28th. You can request an absentee ballot from May 23rd to June 15th. Mail-in and absentee ballots must be postmarked by June 22nd. And of course, then we will have the general election for Mayor Way in November, on November 2nd. So we want to thank our collaborators, the Bronx Democratic County Committee, and we thank you for watching the Bronx Mayoral Forum presented by the Bronx Democratic County Committee and BronxNet. And please make sure you get out and vote on June 22nd. Good night.